The most explosive word in that headline isn't furious. It isn't Meghan. It isn't even ordered out. It's confirms. Because the moment you go looking for Meghan's confirmation, the entire story begins to crack apart. But underneath that crack is something real. A formal palace order. A Windsor mansion. A royal occupant being forced to surrender the keys. Except the name written on that order wasn't Camilla's. So who changed it? More importantly, why would someone drag Meghan into a property dispute happening thousands of miles away from her home in California? That's where this stops looking like another ridiculous royal rumor. Because whoever constructed this story understood exactly which three names would cause maximum damage. Charles, Camilla, Meghan. One king trapped between his wife and his estranged daughter-in-law. One queen supposedly being removed from royal ground. One woman outside the institution, allegedly revealing what the palace wanted buried. Perfect. Almost too perfect. The headline appeared with the urgency of an emergency bulletin. 1 minute ago, Charles furious. Meghan confirms it. Camilla ordered out. No hesitation, no uncertainty, no room to breathe. But the palace hadn't issued a statement announcing Camilla's removal. The Sussex office hadn't published Meghan's supposed confirmation. There was no released letter, no recorded interview, no named official standing outside Windsor Castle. Nothing. Yet people were already reacting as though furniture vans had arrived at dawn. And that's the first trick. You're shown the emotional explosion before anyone proves there was a match. But wait, there really had been an order involving a lodge at Windsor. A brutal one. Buckingham Palace had publicly announced that formal notice was served for the surrender of the Royal Lodge lease. That part wasn't invented. The person named was Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, not Queen Camilla. Now, the story gets uncomfortable. Because someone didn't need to invent an eviction from nothing. They only needed to take a real one, remove one royal name, insert another, then place Meghan beside it like a witness holding the missing document. Think about how calculated that is. Andrew's Royal Lodge battle had already trained the public to believe that Charles was prepared to use housing as a weapon. A royal residence could become leverage. A lease could become humiliation. A set of keys could become a public execution. So when the same language appeared beside Camilla's name, it didn't feel impossible. It felt like the next chapter. But why Camilla? Why not another royal? Because Camilla's place beside Charles has never been treated as an ordinary marriage by the people who resent her. Every room she enters carries history with it. Every title she holds reminds someone of Diana. Every privilege she receives becomes evidence in a trial that never officially ends. Now place her inside Windsor. Not merely visiting, not merely attending a ceremony. Imagine her claiming space inside the physical heart of the monarchy. Then introduce one sentence suggesting she has been ordered out. Suddenly, this isn't a property disagreement. It becomes punishment, rejection, the crown itself appearing to spit her back out. That's the emotional image the claim is selling. But there's a problem nobody wants you to notice. Camilla isn't some distant relative occupying a forgotten cottage under a fragile lease. She's the king's wife. She was crowned beside him. By law, the sovereign spouse is among those eligible to serve as a counselor of state. Official royal records continued, referring to Charles and Camilla as the king and queen, not as a couple undergoing some secret institutional separation. So an order removing her from a royal residence wouldn't be a quiet domestic adjustment. It would be a constitutional thunderclap, the sort of development major British outlets, property officials, royal correspondents, and palace offices couldn't all pretend not to see. Yet, the alleged confirmation existed mainly in headlines repeating one another. No source, no document, no Meghan, just the word confirms doing all the heavy lifting, and Charles being described as furious. Furious at whom? That question is carefully left unanswered. At Meghan for revealing it? At Camilla for refusing to leave? At the person who issued the order? At William? At palace officials? The vagueness isn't a mistake. It lets every viewer bring their favorite enemy into the room. But there was another clue hiding in the location itself: Windsor Lodge. It sounds royal. It sounds specific. It sounds like somewhere you should already recognize. But the famous property at the center of the documented dispute is Royal Lodge, a large residence in Windsor Great Park. Windsor Castle is a separate working royal palace used for audiences, investitures, and official functions. That tiny shift in wording matters. Royal Lodge becomes Windsor Lodge, close enough to feel familiar, different enough to blur which building is actually being discussed. Now you can slide Camilla into the story without explaining what legal claim she supposedly had, who ordered her out, or what residence she was occupying. That's not reporting. That's stage magic. Keep your eyes on the angry king while the property name changes under the table. But Meghan's role is even stranger. She lives outside the working royal structure. She doesn't manage Crown Estate leases. She doesn't issue palace housing decisions. Her official website contains information about her work, projects, and public activities, but no verified announcement confirming that Camilla was expelled from a Windsor lodge. So why would Meghan know first? Because the story doesn't need her to know. It needs viewers to believe she knows. That difference is everything. For years, Harry and Meghan have been positioned as the two people willing to speak after leaving the palace. Private conversations, family arguments, institutional decisions, names, messages, rooms the public never sees. Whether people admire them or despise them, the same assumption keeps the machine running. They might reveal something. So attach Meghan's name to any palace secret, then half the audience arrives hoping she has exposed the truth. The other half arrives furious that she spoke. Either way, they arrive. That's the trap. But the rumor made one decision that could have gone badly wrong. It placed Charles on Camilla's side. Charles furious. Not Charles ordering her out. Not Charles abandoning her. Charles reacting after the alleged order had already been given. Which means, inside the logic of the headline, somebody powerful enough to overrule the king had acted against his wife. Now who could that be? The Crown Estate? Palace administrators? A legal agreement? Prince William preparing for the future? That unanswered space is where the darkest theories begin breeding. Because Charles is king. The public imagines the king owns every gate, corridor, garden, and bedroom connected to the crown. But the Crown Estate describes itself as an independent business managing land for the nation. Its assets aren't simply Charles's private belongings to distribute at breakfast according to his mood. Now the alleged fury begins to sound more believable. Not because there's evidence it happened, because even a king can collide with paperwork. That was exactly what made Andrew's Royal Lodge fight so explosive. His occupation wasn't based merely on brotherly permission. There was a lease. Buckingham Palace's own statement acknowledged that the lease had provided legal protection for him to remain there before formal notice was served. Charles couldn't just point at the door on Monday morning because he was annoyed. A process had to move. Language had to be chosen. Legal protection had to be confronted. Then the announcement landed with surgical coldness. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just one devastating line about surrendering the lease. That's how royal power usually looks when it becomes real. Quiet, typed, final. And once the public had seen that happen to Andrew, another lodge story became easy to sell. But Camilla changes the emotional temperature. Andrew's departure could be framed as disgrace. Camilla's departure would be framed as betrayal. That is why the claim needed Charles to be furious. Without his fury, viewers might assume he had rejected his own wife. With his fury, he becomes helpless. The king reduced to watching someone else push Camilla beyond the gates. Wait, what? Who exactly outranks him inside his own royal drama? The headline never says. It doesn't have to. Your mind supplies the answer. Then you begin defending a theory nobody actually reported. Halfway through this story, you've probably already spotted the pattern before I've said it aloud. Real lodge, real order, wrong occupant, missing confirmation. If you enjoy catching the detail that changes the entire royal story, subscribe now, because the smallest word in the next part is the one that exposes what this claim was really built to do. That word is after. Charles furious after Meghan confirms it. The sequence is deliberate. First, the removal supposedly happens. Then Meghan speaks. Then Charles erupts. But how would anyone know the exact emotional order inside a private royal crisis without showing where the information came from? They wouldn't. Unless Charles issued a statement. He didn't. Unless Meghan described his reaction. No verified record shows that she did. Unless a named palace source spoke publicly, none appears in the claim. So after isn't a timeline. It's a screenplay. Meghan is cast as the detonator. Charles is cast as the explosion. Camilla is cast as the victim. But someone is missing. The person who supposedly gave the order. That absence is the whole trick. Because naming the authority would allow viewers to test the story. Did the king do it? Did the crown estate do it? Did a court do it? Did William do it? Did Camilla voluntarily move? Each answer creates facts that could be checked. So the story refuses to answer. It gives you anger instead of evidence. But official activity was moving in the opposite direction. Queen Camilla was still publicly performing engagements. On June 4, 2026, the official royal website reported her hosting children, supported by a charity at Clarence House. The court circular remained the formal record of royal engagements. There was no accompanying announcement suggesting she had been stripped of her position or driven from the royal household. Could a person leave one residence while continuing public duties? Of course. But that isn't what the headline wants you to picture. It wants disgrace. Boxes, locked gates, a stunned queen standing outside while staff avoid eye contact. The reality, if there were a routine accommodation change, would be too dull. No fury, no betrayal, no Meghan. So the emotional version replaces the documented one. Now imagine Charles seeing the claim. Not the invented red-faced tantrum shown in thumbnails. The real man. A king whose family tensions have been turned into global entertainment for years. His wife's name inserted into his brother's housing scandal. His daughter-in-law falsely positioned as the source. His supposed private reaction announced to millions by people who weren't in the room. Would he be furious? Possibly, but that would be an inference. There is no verified statement proving it, and the likely target of any anger might not be Meghan at all. It could be the machine that keeps using her name to manufacture statements she never made. There's the contradiction nobody expected. A headline apparently attacking Camilla while blaming Meghan may actually exploit both women at once. One becomes the humiliated victim, the other becomes the treacherous informant. Charles becomes the enraged husband. All three are trapped inside roles created for them. But the only confirmed eviction process belongs to a fourth person, Andrew, the man the headline doesn't mention. That omission isn't random. Andrew's story had already happened. When the fighting ended, millions were dead. It was known. People had formed opinions. The uncertainty was gone. But transfer the same drama to Camilla, then suddenly, everything is open again. What did she do? Where will she go? Did William approve it? Did Meghan receive documents? Is Charles losing control? Every question creates another click. But there's an even colder reason the story works. Royal housing is never just housing. A room tells you who is protected. A gate tells you who still belongs. A lease tells you who can resist. A removal tells you whose usefulness has ended. Frogmore Cottage became a symbol when Harry and Meghan were asked to vacate it. Royal Lodge became a symbol during Andrew's battle to remain. So Camilla ordered out instantly suggests her place in the monarchy has changed, even when no title has been removed and no official announcement exists. The building is being used as a substitute for the crown. Push her out of the lodge, the story whispers, and perhaps she's being pushed out of history. That is the fear being sold. But the documented Royal Lodge statement tells a very different story. It says formal notice was served. It identifies Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. It says he would move to alternative private accommodation. It does not mention Camilla. It does not mention Meghan. It does not describe Charles raging behind palace doors. 3 missing names. 1 real order. Now the entire headline turns inside out. Meghan didn't need to confirm anything because the palace had already confirmed the actual housing action months earlier. Camilla wasn't the named occupant because the surrender notice wasn't hers. Charles's alleged fury couldn't be reported as fact because no public evidence established it. So what looked like breaking royal news was more like a costume stitched from older pieces. Andrew's order, Camilla's vulnerability, Meghan's reputation for disclosure, Charles's image as a protective husband. Put them together. Add 1 minute ago. Then watch outrage outrun verification. But don't dismiss this as harmless gossip. Because repetition does something dangerous. The first time people hear the claim, they ask whether it's true. The 5th time, they ask why Camilla was removed. The question has changed. Truth has quietly been replaced by assumed guilt. Now, every future photograph becomes evidence. Camilla isn't seen at one event. She must be gone. Charles looks tense. He must be furious. Meghan posts something vague. It must be a coded message. William visits Windsor? He must have ordered it. Once the invented foundation is accepted, ordinary events begin arranging themselves around it. That's how a rumor stops needing proof. The audience starts producing the proof for it. And perhaps that is the most brutal part for Charles. Not that Meghan exposed a secret, not that Camilla was expelled, but that millions can be made to picture his family tearing itself apart before any member of that family says a single word. A closed gate becomes an eviction. A silent palace becomes a confession. A woman in California becomes the source. A queen becomes homeless. A king becomes powerless, all before breakfast. So when you see the next urgent claim stamped 1 minute ago, don't look first at the person screaming in the thumbnail. Look for the person who has been removed from the headline. This time, it was Andrew. His was the lease. His was the formal notice. His was the Royal Lodge surrender. Camilla inherited the humiliation. Meghan inherited the blame. Charles inherited the fury. But none of them inherited the evidence. Remember that image, 3 famous faces, burning with emotion, while the only real name sits unseen on a cold palace document. Share this with the royal watcher, who almost believed the wrong